go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to the session. Thank you for joining us. This session is From Director to OER Librarian, How Academic Library Administration Can Support Their OER Advocates. And this will be presented by Sabrina Davis. My name is Jocelyn Tipton and I will be the moderator for this session. I'm joined by Elizabeth Batt. I'll monitor the chat questions and Elizabeth will be available to help if you have any technical questions. We ask that everyone in this session adhere to the OESS Code of Conduct. I'm going to place a link to the Code of Conduct in the chat, but want to emphasize a few things before we begin. The Open Education Southern Symposium strives to offer an open, inclusive, and friendly environment for all participants. All attendees are expected to help maintain a professional and welcoming environment free of any type of harassment. Together, we can create a space where individuals feel free to express themselves, work together, and come up with solutions to today's unique challenges. The organizers of OESS appreciate your help in making this symposium a friendly and welcoming virtual environment. Please note that all sessions are being recorded. Sabrina, I turn it over to you.
Thanks, Jocelyn. Hello, everybody. Again, my name is Sabrina Davis. My pronouns are she, her. I am the Open Educational Resources Librarian at Texas Tech University in Lubbock, Texas. Texas Tech, Lubbock, and the surrounding region are occupied and unceded territory of the Comanche and Mescalero Apache peoples. So for my presentation today, I want to tell you about my journey from being a library director to an OER librarian, and hopefully provide library administrators and OER advocates with tips on how library administration can help support those who are doing OER work at their institutions. So for today's agenda, I'll start by telling y'all a little bit about my library backstory. Fair warning, it's a little weird. Next, I'll cover some, but certainly not all, of the responsibilities that most library directors and OER advocates have, specifically highlighting those that are overlaps or areas where the library admin can be most helpful. And then finally, I'll focus on a couple of those responsibility overlaps and provide ways that library admin can help support their OER advocates as they are creating and supporting OER programs and initiatives on their campuses. So if you looked at the abstract for this presentation, you would have seen that I went from interim director to full director at a small private liberal arts institution in the Midwest, to now being an OER librarian at a large public institution in Texas. I ask myself basically every day how I got here. So I'm guessing that some of you probably had that same question. So here's a quick look at my library backstory just to kind of help answer that question, how did I get here? Most librarians that I've talked to or have met have had a fairly, quote, non-traditional trajectory in their library careers. So I think that mine is probably a normal journey, but I still think it's a little odd. So while I was in library school, in grad school, I worked part-time as the Associate Director of Library Services at a 2-year technical college in the Midwest. If you want to know why I had such a pretty title as a grad student, feel free to ask at the end of the presentation, or you can email me. Now, right out of grad school, I was lucky and was hired as the User Services Librarian at a small private liberal arts institution. About 9 or so months after starting in that role, the library director at that institution left, and I was then named the interim director. I served as interim director for a full year, until I was officially named the director of university libraries. And then I served as the full director for a full year. So during that year as director of university libraries, I oversaw the university libraries through the first academic year of the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm sure that many, if not all of you, can relate to the struggle of that fall 2020 and spring 2021 academic year. As the full library director, when I first got involved with OER, and I tried to spearhead some initiatives on campus, and I worked with various faculty to do so. And as I learned more about OER, a passion developed, which then led me to look for positions that were devoted solely to OER efforts on a college or university campus. I then started in my current role as the OER librarian at Texas Tech in the summer of 2021. So like I said, it's kind of a weird and fast trajectory, but I'm thankful for the journey, all the things that I've learned, especially very early on in my career as a librarian. And I'm very thankful for where it's led me and the work that I get to do today. So now on to the more fun part of the presentation. So not long after starting as an OER librarian, I very quickly realized that there were quite a few overlaps in the responsibilities that I had had as a library director and the responsibilities that I currently have. Again, I want to state that the lists I provided here are not all inclusive. So this is definitely not all that library directors do or all that library advocates or OER advocates do. So as I'm going through the presentation, if you can think of other connections that you see between like library administration and OER advocates, feel free to add those into the chat. I'd be really curious to see what connections you guys see and what you think. So for many OER advocates, especially librarians, OER is simply a part of their job responsibilities. So with keeping this in mind and looking at some of the overlaps that exist in the responsibilities between OER admin and library admin and OER advocates, I want to talk a little bit about how library directors and other admin can help their OER advocates be successful. And then for the purposes of this presentation and kind of keeping within time, we will look specifically at advocacy, budget and grant management, data collection, committee service, and collaboration. So let's start with advocacy. So if you've ever worked in library administration, I would bet that you've had to explain, likely multiple times, the value of libraries to campus administration and other stakeholders. OER advocates will also be spending a lot of time advocating for the value of open resources and textbook affordability to campus stakeholders. So there's definitely that connection there. But as a library director or admin, you are connected to many folks within the academic administration simply by the nature of your position. So just, based on what you do, you're going to work a lot with, provost or academic affairs vice presidents, deans, department chairs, etc., just because of your position within the university or college. So in order to help those that are doing OER work on your campus and their advocacy responsibilities, the first thing I would suggest is taking the time to introduce them to those who are working in these academic administration roles. Not only does this put faces to names, but it will also give your OER advocate a foot in the door if they ever need to reach out to these academic administrators in the future. So, for example, my dean here at Texas Tech, she had been talking with one of the other deans at another college, and in that conversation, OER was brought up, and my dean then introduced me to that other dean. And I was able to find out from that dean and meet, other department chairs in their areas or other people in those areas that were really supportive or interested in OER. So, for the library admin, kind of playing that role in introducing your OER advocates can be super helpful to them. And it also kind of keeps them from having to do a lot of additional cold emailing. The next thing that library admin can do is helping their OER advocates get included or involved in faculty senate meetings. I think regardless of the faculty status of librarians on your campus, most faculty senates will hear presentations or something from other areas on campus. So, as library admin, knowing who to talk to and who to connect your OER advocate to that is on faculty senate can be really, really helpful. And then another part of advocacy is making sure that OER programs and initiatives are involved in the library's current marketing strategies or marketing plan. So kind of, being the person that kind of makes sure that that happens can be really helpful in ensuring that the OER services are getting marketed and out beyond the library. The next is data collection, assessment, and reporting. So full disclosure, this is probably where I struggled most as OER director. And it's where I've had to spend a lot of my time in my current role, just kind of learning new things, doing lots of reading, and talking to my library admin here at Texas Tech. So, I think for librarians especially, we're really good at using our data internally within the library or sharing our library data with other librarians at other institutions. But it's really important, and we need to make sure that our data is also telling the story that other campus stakeholders want to hear. So I think that's where library admin can definitely help your OER advocates as they are collecting, assessing, and reporting all of the OER data. So the first thing is ensuring that your OER advocates are aware of and familiar with the library and institutional strategic plan. This is especially going to be helpful, for example, if your OER efforts or textbook affordability are not yet included in your institutional strategic plan. Even if that's not the case, there are other ways that you can show that OER initiatives and what you're doing are supporting and aligned with the strategic plan. So, from library admin, make sure your OER advocates know about the institutional strategic plan. The next would be helping your OER advocates understand what is important to the university administration and other academic administration. So, for example, is your university really focused on retention? Okay, that's great. Talk to your OER advocates about collecting and reporting OER data, showing how OER supports retention, and then how to present that, to the administration if that's an important goal for the institution. Are your, deans and department chairs, are they really concerned about course enrollment? At that point, then you can help your OER advocates collect and report data showing whether, for example, courses using OER have faster fill rates or overall higher enrollment than classes that are not using OER. So again, this just kind of goes back to as library admin, you have your ear to the ground to, I think, a lot more of what's happening institution-wide, and kind of the direction in which the institution is wanting to go or is going. So helping your OER advocates stay up to date with that and know how to use all of the data and information that they're collecting to share a particular story that will appeal to university administration is really, really important. And then the last point, which is a point that I still am learning myself, is that OER data collection, assessment, and reporting may take some trial and error, and that's okay. So, be sure to point your OER advocates to resources that can help. And one that I was actually introduced to last week by Jennifer Pate was Jeff Gallant's chapters in the OER Starter Kit for program managers. So if you are doing any sort of OER data collection, assessment, and reporting, I highly, highly recommend the chapters in that work. All right, so probably like the most unfun slide of the whole presentation is, money. No one likes to talk about money. However, budget management is probably one of the larger responsibilities of library administration. So while it might not be fun, it does provide you with really valuable knowledge about how money management works at your institution. So as has been pointed out at other presentations today, OER programs and advocates desperately need funding. So as library admin, if possible, looking at your budget to see if the library could fund an institutional grant or stipend program for faculty, for example. You could also look at, not only the library budget, but reaching out to other departments on campus and seeing if, potentially doing some sort of cost sharing if they also want to support OER initiatives. I know that we started an OER grant program here at Texas Tech this last year, and it was the cost for that was shared between the libraries and our e-learning department. So that way, it wasn't just the library kind of doing this on its own. It was, a good collaboration with other areas on campus. So if you are able to do some sort of like institutional grant or stipend program, you could also help OER advocates just through the process of getting funds from, whatever budget or line item that it's coming out of to the faculty awardees. So this could include, making sure that all necessary paperwork is collected for a business office, talking with payroll to ensure that all awardees are aware of any tax deductions, for example, and things like that. So again, library admin tend to be familiar with how money moves within and out of their department. So, be sure to share that knowledge with your OER folks if you are able to do an internal OER grant stipend program. And lastly, OER advocates are frequently responsible for grant management and helping faculty locate outside funding for OER adoption and creation. So if your institution has a department or office that assists with research, just be sure that your OER advocates are aware that this office exists and that they do have an additional resource. This could be especially useful. I know it was for me. If you're new to the state, I was brand new to Texas, and I, wasn't very familiar yet when I first started with, any sort of state funding that Texas had available for OER. So having that information is super helpful. Now, I know that committee and other service work may not always be the most fun, but it can be a great way for OER advocates to meet folks from all over the campus community. So the big thing here is I would have the library admin encourage their OER advocates to participate in committee service if they aren't doing so already. Again, simply because it will just allow them to meet and talk with other people on campus. I would also encourage library advocates or OER advocates to participate in institutional programs and events that aren't necessarily geared specifically toward librarians. So this can include, book clubs that are hosted by other areas on campus. It could be, volunteering to be a reviewer for an undergraduate research fair, something like that. This just gives you a way to meet faculty, students, and kind of get a feel for the campus culture and what's important. And the thing I always remember is like the title of OER Librarian or OER Coordinator can be a really interesting conversation starter. So when I meet somebody new and they ask, oh, what do you do on campus? I'm like, oh, I'm an OER librarian. And I usually get one of two responses. It's either, oh, what is OER? Or I get, oh my gosh, we have an OER person. That's so exciting. Can we chat? That's kind of why I think that committees and other service opportunities are important. Now to one of my favorite parts of both library of admin and OER work, which is collaboration. So OER advocates are going to be doing a lot of their work outside of the library, and that's okay. What I think is really important is that if OER is only just a part of someone's job responsibilities, library admin need to ensure that they have time to get out of the library to make the connections that are necessary for their program to be successful. So, Jeff had mentioned, the importance of having OER in the job description. And I think that this is one of the reasons why that's so important, is because then they are more likely to have the time to do the work necessary. The other thing is I would encourage OER advocates to make connections and collaborate with those outside of academic affairs. Most libraries do fall within academic affairs, so I get that it's a very natural, trajectory to want to work with folks in that area. But you'd be really amazed where you can find OER supporters. That could be from student support services, the bookstore, or wherever else. For example, one of my biggest OER supporters here at Texas Tech is actually the vice president for auxiliary services. One of the areas he does oversee is the bookstore, which is how I met him. But the reason he is so supportive of OER is that he actually has 2 children that are currently college students. And he is just amazed and appalled at the price of textbooks. So he has definitely become one of my biggest advocates. So don't be afraid to get out of academic affairs. So again, I only had 30 minutes. So I only went over just a few ways that I think library admin can help support their OER advocates, but there are honestly so many other ways. Again, if you can think of any, feel free to put them in the chat. I'd love to see what you guys think. I want to thank you all for attending my presentation. If you want to chat ever, just feel free to email me. I'm always happy to chat. You can always follow me on Twitter. I do a lot of tweeting and retweeting about OER, so it could be a lot of fun.